Right, and we're back, and we've just finished with this, which you can't sell in the UK at all, unless a museum wants to buy it. There are exceptions. If an accredited museum wants to buy something off you, they're allowed to do so for their collections. Good luck with that. None of them have got any money. So that's out the window. And even if they had money, they don't want to buy ivory, to be honest. Most museums are taking ivory objects off you very, very slowly if you go on their online catalogues. And now I want to show you this. This is something I bought more than 10 years ago. This is pretty fabulous. Now, this is a fork, obviously, three-pronged fork, and the mounts on it are continental. I'll bring them up there. And they're actually the Paris first standard marks. Two different standards of silver worked in Paris in the 19th century, 950 standard and 800 standard. This is the better, the higher 950 standard. It is, that part of it is built like a tank. Absolutely amazing quality, all silver gilt, heavy as lead. This came up at an auction, catalogued as what you would expect it to be, a French early 19th century ivory handled fork. Now you can see clearly that the ivory is more than 10% of this object. So again, this, strictly speaking, you can't sell it without registering for an exemption. You could, however, if you owned it, and I'll find you and I'll shoot you if you do, you could smash the handle off and just sell this part for scrap. It's quite heavy. It weighs about 2.5 ounces, I think, so it's worth about £50 scrap. But that's the only way you could sell it, unless you went for the exceptional exemption. Now, that was in a local sale for £100. I paid a fair bit more than that for it. Would you bother to apply for an exemption for a 19th century French table fork? Do you think it's worthwhile? I'll give you a minute to think, or a few seconds, and I imagine most of you are saying no. That's because you don't know what I know. Maybe some of you do, and you don't have this book. This is Knives and Forks by Major C.T.P. Bailey. Knives and Forks in the collection of the Victoria and Albert Museum. I think it was published in the 20s. Let me check. Well, it's inscribed 1927. So I think that's about right. No date of publication. That would be too useful, wouldn't it? Yes, but I think 1920s. If you flick through it, you will, after going through many pages, find this. Does it at all look familiar? Scale aside, lots of cavorting, there, we'll put it next to that one, cavorting little cherubs with their little bums out, all sporting amid foliage. Very similar to that one. Almost identical. This, in fact, is what happens with a lot of cutlery and flatware. This handle, because it's so fine, I'll try and get it very close for you. We'll do it in close up anyway. Is a little miniature work of art, and it is a 17th century piece of Italian carving. And the slight crack to it, which runs down here, is where it's initially been removed from an old knife, as you saw, probably a steel one that rusted away, and these fabulous quality, empire quality mounts have been put on. Extraordinary quality silver gilt mounts. You'll rarely see anything finer than that, because this was so valued and important. So actually, this is something that I paid many hundreds of pounds for. Before the ban came in, it was worth maybe £3,000 or £4,000 as an exceptional piece of carved ivory, it might gain an exemption were I to apply for it at £250. If it did, because of the rarity of objects on the market, this would probably now be worth in excess of £5,000, which is fine. It's safeguarded. The only problem is you have to know what it is before you apply for the exemption. And most people that went to the auction, the people that owned it, the people that catalogued it, and most of the people that viewed it, even though they were dealers in silver and what have you, they had no idea that the handle was that early. And my eternal fear is that there are objects, and I know there are objects up and down the country that have been smashed simply because owners are frightened about this. So I will also say I run a little volunteer, it's no more than that, I'm afraid, we don't have any funds for it, a little volunteer organisation called the Antiques Rescue Centre, or ARC for short, and you can find it on Instagram and you can find it on Twitter, and there is a website if you Google the name. And if you've got something like this and you just want a bit of friendly advice, send me a picture. I mean, most times I have to tell people that what they have looks like it's going to be fairly modern 20th century tourist objects, which either I can't accept as donations if they have to get rid of them, or that are certainly not worthwhile. They're applying for an exemption for these things, sadly, and they will just have to either give them to a family member, but the reason they usually get in touch is nobody wants them in the first place, and these things end up in the bin. But if you're in any doubt, I have no problem whatsoever in taking a few minutes out of my day to get back to you and to tell you whether something might or might not be worthwhile, because we're stuck with the laws that we've got at the moment. I don't think, honestly, they'll ever change. They might get stricter, if anything, with governments coming in, but they're never going to change. And lots of this stuff has already been thrown away. So we want to stop that as much as possible. But I also understand the financial rigours, and I'm going to make a point with this. This is something that came to me, again, just before the ban came in. And I didn't buy this for this. I bought a rare provincial marrow scoop, which I then sold, which was with this. The auctioneer had lotted them together. So basically, the thing I bought, I got this free. But this is a very unusual French marrow scoop. It's quite broad, and it's by Edward Courvoisier of Paris, and he worked from 1863 to 1880. Obviously, French silver doesn't have, later French silver doesn't have that date letter system, so you have to go by the working dates. Beautiful carved ivory handle, all engraved, whacking great crack down it. And this is the problem. I mean, I have kept this for posterity, and I will pop it in before I die into the holdings of the Antiques Rescue Centre, and then hopefully at some point there'll be a home for all these things, and a museum will take them or whatever. But remember, this owes me nothing. And unfortunately, there is about 3 ounces of 950 standard silver in this thing. So if I was desperate for money, which I frequently am, but if I was desperate for money, the only way you can legally sell that in the UK is to smash the handle off and scrap it. But its scrap value is £60. Its value as a French marrow scoop with a crack in the handle before it became illegal was probably not much more than £60. It might have been 70 or 80 quid. So this is why these things are readily destroyed. But just to recap, you can sell objects that are silver with less than 10% ivory in them. So if it has a finial, if it's a teapot with insulators in the handle, and you look at them and you're pretty sure they're ivory, and a lot of them are. If it's a finial on a caster, if it's less than 10%, you can sell it, but you have to register it and you have to pay that £20 charge. If, like this, it's clearly over 10%, I'm afraid you're stuffed. The only way to legally sell it is either to sell it to a museum. No museum in the world, certainly not one in the UK, wants to buy that, I promise you. Or you go down the route of applying for a £250 exceptional exemption. And to put it into context, the first year that this scheme ran, with, think about it, with millions of antiques being sold each year in the UK, I think it was about 93 items were granted that exemption, which is infinitesimal number, possibly because the new law wasn't being implemented quite as strongly as it will be in future years. Lots of ignorance about this law still, very little publicity about it. But again, if you have beautiful objects where it's clearly over 10%, but it dates before 1918, this is the other thing, has to date before 1918. With the de minimis for 10%, it has to date before the 3rd of March 1947. But with the exceptional exemption, it has to be before 1918. So if you have some fabulous Art Deco figurine made in the 20s that is of the finest quality and is a world-class object, you still will not be able to get an exemption for that, unfortunately, which is how crazy things have gotten over here, I'm afraid. But if you want an opinion on something you've got, and you're in the UK, and I stress this is a UK law, if you're in the UK and you've got something and you're about to throw it in the bin, but you're not sure, or you're about to smash the handle off with a hammer, for God's sake, stop. Contact me through the Antiques Rescue Centre, and I will advise you the best I can. And if I don't know, I will say I don't know. And contrary to what a lot of very kind people say about me, I really don't know everything. I know a thimbleful about antiques when you consider everything that's known about antiques, but I will do my best, and I may know somebody else that knows a little bit more than me as well. So there we go, a slightly more serious topic, but one I've been asked about a lot. So we've addressed the issue, and for good or bad, I hope that adds a little bit of clarification. So until next week, goodbye and good antiques hunting.